GoForThe2.com in with the Week 8 predictions. Before I get into the predictions for this coming Saturday, this weekend, October 19th, college football today, live from the Sports Grid studio inside the FanDuel Sportsbook at the Meadowlands. College football today, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. You could stream it on Zumo TV, channel 719, or go to sportsgrid.com. Sportsgrid.com. I'll give you all my picks that are on this video, along with the top 25 battles and some under-the-radar games that I have my eye on as the week progresses. Let's jump right into the Week 8 predictions. It starts within the SEC and LSU on the road against Mississippi State. LSU has won 3 of the last 5 over the Bulldogs by an average margin of victory of 7 points per game. Picked up this victory last year in Baton Rouge by a score of 19-3. What can you say about Joe Burrow and the crew, baby? They are hitting on all cylinders. They won last weekend as a 14-point favorite against Florida, right on the number, 42-28. Joe Burrow did throw for 293 yards, 3 touchdowns. Entering this matchup against Mississippi State, he's completed 79% of his passes, over 2,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. The kid had only 19 touchdown passes all of last year. He is definitely the Heisman Trophy frontrunner at this point in the season, with 2 big games under his belt, Florida and Texas. We'll see if he can continue the role within the month of October. When you look at this LSU offense, they averaged and then put up over 500 yards on Florida's defense. That was a Florida defense allowing only 87 rushing yards per game and holding opposing offenses to 183 yards through in the back end in the secondary. Joe Burrow stretched that defense wide. That opened up the rushing attack later in that matchup. And credit the LSU Tiger defense, very solid in red zone opportunities and critical junctures to give the football back to Joe Burrow. But this is going to be asking a lot out of LSU to go now on the road to Starkville and dominate yet again. This is an offense that's averaging 54 total points per game, but they do have Auburn on deck next weekend, October 26th, at home in Baton Rouge. They played Florida, an emotional game, now have to go on the road in Starkville the week before they play Auburn. I think that's asking a lot. On the flip side, you have Mississippi State. They're reeling right now. They lost that matchup to Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt, 20-10. They were a 7-point favorite in that matchup. They trailed at half, 10-3. Tommy Stevens threw for 67 yards, 2 critical interceptions, and gave way to Schrader in the second half. In the end, they dropped that matchup 20-10. Joe Moorhead vowed to turn around the program after that loss in Knoxville. But I break this game down twofold. In order for Mississippi State to at least keep this game close, they're going to need to run the football. They're averaging 194 rushing yards per game, only passing for 187 through the air with both Schrader and Stevens. They're going to need to sustain drives going up against this LSU Tiger offense and defense in this matchup. But I expect LSU to come out flat in this ballgame. The emotional victory, now a road game in Starkville, even though it's an SEC opponent, that's still asking a lot, coupled with the fact that under Joe Moorhead, Mississippi State has played much better at home than they have on the road. Under Joe Moorhead, since last year, 8-2 straight up. On the road, just 3-6. I expect a better effort this coming Saturday. LSU wins, but Mississippi State does keep it within the 20.5-point number this coming Saturday. We'll keep it in the SEC. It's Auburn coming out of a bye week facing Arkansas. Auburn's won the last 3 meetings by an average margin of victory of 39.6 points per game. This is an Auburn team that was hitting on all cylinders prior to the road loss to Florida. In that loss, they lost their leading rusher, Whitlow, that is gone for the season with an ACL injury. Now Auburn will look to run the football on an Arkansas defense that gave up 320 rushing yards to Kentucky last weekend in Lexington. When you look at the battle overall, Auburn has LSU on deck. They're going on the road coming out of a bye week. Do they start flat, even though they should be rested heading into this matchup? Is this a different offense without Whitlow in there? And it is technically back-to-back road games for Bo Nix. When you look at Arkansas as a whole, break this game down this way. Arkansas over the last two SEC games has played very tough. Now, granted, it was Texas A&M and it was Kentucky, but they lost both of those games by only 8 points total, 4 points per game. Their quarterback, Nick Starkel, can stretch that Auburn defense over the top, and I look for Arkansas to just make enough plays to keep it within this number. Saturday early afternoon, 12 o'clock kick in Fayetteville. Auburn wins, but they only win by about 14 points over the Razorbacks this coming Saturday afternoon. Another big battle takes place in the ACC. It's Wake Forest, Florida State. Florida State has dominated the series all time, 36-1 over the Demon Deacons. They've won 7 straight over Wake Forest by an average margin of victory of 27.8 points per game. The last 3 games, they've won by an average margin of victory of 13 points per game. But this is back-to-back road games for Florida State this coming weekend. Last week, they were a 27.5-point underdog to Clemson. They got abused. They trailed 42-0 before losing that matchup by a score of 45-14. They gave up 320 rushing yards to the Clemson Tigers, allowed 3 sacks for their offensive line, and that's a concern going up against a speed team in Wake Forest. I break this game down this way. Florida State, for me, is still not doing the things that they need to do to win consistently. When you look at last year, they had one of the worst rushing offenses in college football, ranked 126th out of 129 teams in FBS, averaging 91 rushing yards per game. Even after Clemson, they're only averaging 118 rushing yards per game, and more importantly, on third downs, only converting 33% of the time. In the last 3 games against NC State, Louisville, both of those games they won, and Clemson, they've only converted 12 of 42 third down attempts. That's only 28% on third downs. If they force 3 and outs for their offense, that's going to give the ball back to a high-octane offense in Jamie Newman and Wake Forest. You have a Wake Forest offense right now that is averaging over 500 yards of total offense, rushing for over 200, and passing for 331 through the air with Jamie Newman. Newman has completed 67% of his passes, over 1,700 passing yards, 17 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and has 2 big play wide receivers in Chad Surratt and Scotty Washington that have combined for 75 receptions, over 1,200 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. They're going to look to attack a Florida State defense that's giving up 290 passing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks. Wake Forest is converting 53% of their third down opportunities, and more importantly, holding opposing offenses to 28% on third downs. So that's the matchup for me that I break this game down. And you look at Wake Forest's defense, they're opportunistic and they can run sideline to sideline. They have very good playmakers at the point of attack. They're physical in run support, have linebackers like Nasir Greer and Justin Sternan that are very physical and can challenge Florida State and Cam Akers even in the short to intermediate passing game. I think this is a bad matchup for Florida State. I know they've won 7 straight, but I don't like the coaching matchup either. I like Dave Clawson. Give me Wake Forest. I think they were looking ahead last week when they lost to Louisville 62-59. They have the better quarterback. They have the better offense. And more importantly, I think they have the better defense heading into this matchup. I think they could force pressure on James Blackman and force him into short throws underneath coverage. Florida State's allowed 22 total sacks on the year. That's another cause of concern. Give me Wake Forest to cover this number. I think it's high scoring, 34-27. Wake Forest gets the victory over Florida State. Let's keep it within the ACC. You have North Carolina on the road against Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech has won 3 straight over the Tar Heels by an average margin of victory of 28.6 points per game. Picked up this victory last year in Chapel Hill by a score of 22-19. When you look at North Carolina, they're coming out of a bye week. 2 weeks ago, they knocked off Georgia Tech on the road as a 9.5-point favorite. They now go on the road to face Virginia Tech that has not played well this year. They're 4-2 overall, but unbelievable that they're actually 4-2. They did play Old Dominion, they did play Furman, and they did play Richmond. Those are 3 of their wins right there. care. They're 1-5 against the number heading into 2019 in this Week 8 matchup against North Carolina. This is a critical game for Justin Fuente, but here's the matchup, why I like Virginia Tech. When you look at their offense, Virginia Tech is balanced. They're rushing for around 160 yards per game, passing for over 200 with Hendon Hooker. Hooker has looked good. He completed 55% of his passes, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. You look at the defense overall for Virginia Tech, holding opposing offenses to 145 rushing yards per game and 234 in the secondary to opposing quarterbacks, but they're going up against a freshman quarterback in Sam Howell. Granted, he has not looked like a freshman, but he's going on the road to a very tough environment. He played well on the road in Wake Forest, played well against Georgia Tech, but this is still a different animal in Lane Stadium, even with a week of preparation. When you look at Virginia Tech as well, the offensive line going up against the defensive front. Virginia Tech's defensive front going up against North Carolina's offensive line. 20 sacks apiece. North Carolina's allowed 20 sacks. Virginia Tech has created and recorded 20 sacks on the year. Look for Bud Foster to mix up coverage. Look for him to blitz off the edge and force Howell into mistakes. Howell's played well. He's completed over 58% of his passes, over 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns, three interceptions. But Virginia Tech, as a home dog, wins this ball game. Think it's high scoring as well. Virginia Tech 35, North Carolina 28. Virginia Tech does cover this number Saturday afternoon in Lane Stadium. Let's keep it in the ACC. It's Virginia and it's Duke. Virginia has not looked good. They've lost 2 straight to both Miami and Notre Dame. Notre Dame, they were leading at the half. Miami, they played very well, but just kicked field goals and did not make enough plays to knock off the Hurricanes in that battle. Bryce Perkins has looked mediocre and pedestrian over the last couple of weeks, has forced balls into coverage, has held the football way too long, but I think he gets right this coming Saturday against Duke. They've won 4 straight against the Duke Blue Devils by an average margin of victory of 10.7 points per game. Got this victory last year by a score of 28-14. This is a team that I think matches up very well against Duke from a schematic advantage, and I think that Bryce Perkins breaks out in a big way this coming Saturday. When you look at the front offensive line for Duke, they're playing very well. They've only allowed less than 10 sacks on the year, 8 sacks allowed all season long. And when you think about some of the teams that they've played, Virginia Tech, Alabama, they're protecting Quentin Harris, but you're going up against a Virginia defense that has recorded 27 total sacks on the year, and I think that's the matchup going up against those linebackers, Noah Taylor and Charles Snowden heading into this matchup. I think they could do enough, even though Bryce Hall is not there, to confuse Quentin Harris, force turnovers, and look for Virginia to break out in a big way. Look for them to challenge Duke over the top. Virginia cannot run the football consistently. They're only averaging around 103 rushing yards per game. I think it's their speed. Joe Reed and those wide receivers going up against Duke's defense over the top. Virginia does get a 14-point win over the Duke Blue Devils in Charlottesville. They rebound in a big way this coming Saturday. Another big battle takes place in the Big 12. It's TCU and Kansas State. TCU has won 2 straight over the Wildcats. They won last year by a score of 14-13. This game, both teams are coming out of a bye week, but for me, it's very simple. The rushing attack for TCU going up against the front 7 of K-State. TCU is averaging 241 rushing yards per game. K-State's defensive front giving up 187 rushing yards to opposing offenses. You saw it a couple of weeks ago against Baylor and John Lovett. Baylor was able to wear them down at the point of attack. You have a TCU defense as well, playing very well and rock solid in run support. TCU giving up 107 rushing yards per game, only allowing 182 passing yards to opposing quarterbacks. When you look at Skylar Thompson, he's played well, but he's not an elite quarterback and not going to challenge that TCU defense over the top. Look for TCU to stack the box and force Thompson to beat them in terms of the passing attack. On the flip side, you have a quarterback in Max Duggan for TCU that has played well. He's completed 56% of his passes, over 700 yards, 9 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also has backup Alex Delton that did play for Kansas State last year is a mobile quarterback. He could always be called on as a senior should this game fall for Gary Patterson and the crew. You also look at TCU from an offensive perspective, converting 51% of their third down opportunities and holding opposing offenses to only 30% on third down conversions. To me, that's the difference. TCU gets a 10-point victory over Kansas State, 30-20 this coming weekend in Manhattan. Let's talk about that big battle in the Pac-12. It's Washington and Oregon. What can you say about Oregon? I picked them last week against Colorado. They did not disappoint, 45-3 over the Buffaloes. They shut down Steven Montez, forced 4 interceptions. This is now 5 straight games for Oregon, 7 points or less in terms of holding opposing offenses. That's an amazing statistic. They now go on the road to face their heated rivals. If you don't know about this rivalry because it's out west, Oregon and Washington absolutely hate each other. Oregon has won this series. They've won 3 of the last 5 by an average margin of victory of 25.6 points per game and got this victory last year in overtime, 30-27. Washington missed a field goal in regulation. In overtime, they rushed down to the 4-yard line. Chris Peterson, very conservative, elected to go to the field goal, and that's where Verdell and Oregon scored the touchdown for Mario Cristobal. Now they go on the road, and they have not played well since 2016, straight up on the road or on a neutral field site. Oregon is just 7-14 overall in terms of road matchups straight up. They're going up against a team in Washington that is 26-1 since 2016 against Pac-12 opponents, but more importantly is an underdog for the first time in Seattle since 2014. When you watch that matchup for Washington last week, they impressed me in the second half. I picked against them with Arizona. Arizona and Khalil Tate had a 17-13 halftime lead, but in the end, Jacob Eason and that offense made halftime adjustments and challenged Arizona over the top. When you look at Jacob Eason completing 66% of his passes, over 1,300 yards passing, 13 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. You have a Washington defense that's only allowing 145 rushing yards per game. They can play man-to-man coverage. They're going to look to blitz Justin Herbert and force short throws under coverage. I think they can run the football with Ahmed and their offensive line, wear down Oregon, even though Oregon's been hitting on all cylinders. Washington with a 10-point win, 40-30 over the Ducks in Seattle. Expect a shootout. Everybody will be looking defense. It goes way over the total. Look for Jake Eason as well. In order for Washington to win this battle, they cannot run on first down, run on second down, and play action on third. They need to be aggressive, challenge that Oregon defense over the top. That'll loosen up running lanes for Ahmed later in that matchup. That's what you saw in the second half against Arizona, and that's what I expect to continue this coming Saturday at home against the Ducks. Very good ball game, but in the end, Washington goes to 5-2 on the year. 6-2 on the year with a big victory, 40-30 over Oregon this coming Saturday. Stay with me all season long. We're just getting started. Follow the TV and radio show, Zumo TV, channel 719, College Football Today, this coming Saturday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. See you then. College football is great. I just love talking about it.